Hey guys, today in Algebra 1B we're looking at problem set 105, which is dealing with factoring by grouping. You see these examples that I have here on the board, or on the screen. We're going to be asked to factor these problems. Now we've done a lot of factoring where we split things up into groups into a product of things multiply together. And when you look at these, the very first thing you should look for is, do they have anything in common? That's always our first step in factoring. Well, on this first example, when I look at those four terms, I don't see anything in common in all four terms. And I don't see any x squareds or anything like that where we do our trinomial factoring. In fact, we have too many terms for that. So we need a different approach. And we're going to have this idea of factoring by grouping. And what that means is we're going to split this problem up into two groups, or however many groups we need, and see if within those little groups if we can do any factoring out of those groups. So the way it works is I'm going to look at this problem and I'm going to take or try just the first two terms. And if I were to group them in parentheses, do those two terms have anything in common? Well, I think they might. Now, I need these groups separated by a plus sign to start my factoring process. If I look at the second group, I want this plus sign in between. Do those two have anything in common? I think they might. So, when I look at the first group, what do they have in common? Well, you should notice they both have an A. So we're going to factor out that A. When I pull an A out front of that group, that leaves me an xy minus 4. Then, in the second group, again, I have that plus sign in between. What do these two have in common? Well, you should notice they both have a B. And when I factor out that B, I look at what's left there. I'm left with an xy minus 4. Okay? So you should start to see something here. That plus sign separates this into really two big terms. The A times x minus 4 is one term, B times x minus 4 is a second term. Now, I'm going to continue the factoring process. I'm looking at these two terms, and do those two terms have anything in common? Well, I see an x minus 4, that group, and an x minus 4 in the other group, or in the other term. Since they both have that group x minus 4, I'm going to factor that out just like I took out the A and I took out the B. So when I factor out xy minus 4, it's very important that that stays in parentheses. Then I need to look in parentheses at what was left when I moved the xy minus 4 out. In the first set, I'm left with an A, plus in the second set, I'm left with a B. Now, xy minus 4, I can't do any more factoring to that. A plus B, I can't do any more factoring to that. My whole goal of the problem was to split this whole thing up into a product of things multiplied together. And that's what we ended up with. I have it broken down into a product of things. So that is my factored answer. Now, one thing you'll notice on these problems, it is possible we could have rearranged the equation from the very beginning and grouped things slightly differently. On this problem, we have some minus signs we'd have to worry about, but we could have grouped them, put the xya and the xyb together, and the 4a and 4b together. We'd have to watch our negative signs, but we could have grouped them differently, but in the end, we would have ended up with the same answer. Okay, so just be aware that you can group them sometimes in multiple ways. So let's look at this second problem. We're going to do the same thing. When I look at the whole thing, I don't see any common term in the whole thing. So we're going to separate it into groups. This one, everything is addition, so that's a good thing. I can group, say, the first two together. Do they happen to have a common factor? And then also, plus separates the second group. Look to see if they have something in common. Okay? So I think this one is going to work just like the first problem. Out of this first set, I see that they both have an n. So I'm going to factor out an n. And that leaves an s plus 3x. Plus, it's real important to leave that plus sign in between there. In the second group, what can I take out of both of those? Well, a 2 and a 6. They're both divisible by 2, so I can factor out a 2. And I also see that they have a c in common. So I'm going to factor out a 2c. That leaves an s plus 6 divided by 2 is 3, and I'm left with an x. All right, same thing as on the first example. There's one term, there's our second term. Do those two terms have anything in common now? Well, you should recognize that group, s plus 3x. They have that common group, so that comes out. Again, that has to be in parentheses, and then I show parentheses what's left. Out of the first group, I'm left with an n plus. Second group, I have a 2c. Okay? There's our factored answer. Those groups won't factor down anymore, and that's as far as we can go. All right, hopefully this is starting to make some sense. Let's look at this last problem. Again, I'm going to group them. For now, most of them will probably group the first two and the second two. Be careful to make sure that's a plus sign in between. So if I group the first two and I group the second two, separated by that plus sign, what does the first group have in common? Well, you should recognize they have an m, so pull that m out. What's left? Take an m out of the first, I have a 2x, minus, pull out an m, I have a 3. Plus, second group, what do they have in common? I see that they have a p, c. And now I look at what was left. When I pull PC out of the first one, I'm left with a 2x, minus, take out PC, and I have a 3. All right, hopefully you're starting to recognize how this works. I see that they both have that group, 2x minus 3. So that is my common factor that moves out front. Make sure it's in parentheses again, and then show in parentheses what was left. Move 2x minus 3 out front. On the first part, I'm left with an m, plus on the second part, I'm left with PC. Neither one of those will factor down anymore. So that is our factored answer. Okay? That's problem set 105, factoring by grouping. You're going to separate the expression into multiple groups separated by plus signs, and then factor common things out of those individual groups, and then see if those groups that are left happen to be the same, and you can pull that group out of all the parts and be able to factor it down some more. Okay, factoring by grouping. Separate things into groups, factor the little parts, factor the big thing. Okay, that's problem set 105. That's all I got. Good luck.